All right, guys. E3 is officially over in terms of the conferences, and I assume most major game announcements or anything like that. So it's time to go ahead and do a whole wrap up of everything that's happened. Before I get into it, guys, just want to make sure I clarify, give the proper context under which I'm doing this video. When I'm doing E3 reviews, again, I'm also weighing the presentations themselves because these are presentations and all because we may have seen a lot of games this year or a lot of good games or whatever. That's something that's separate from me talking about the actual conferences themselves. You see what I'm saying? So in terms of did we see a lot of great games this year's E3? Yeah, we pretty much do every year. So honestly, that's just kind of a redundant thing to say in my eyes because of course E3 there's going to be tons of great looking games revealed. That goes without saying. You see what I'm saying? So what's the point of even bringing that up? So whenever I'm debating or discussing how good E3 was, I'm specifically talking about the conferences and the reveals and things of that nature. I'm not talking about the games themselves. We got a lot of great games this year, but the presentations themselves are very lackluster. And a lot of the new games this year that were announced and shown or whatever weren't actually shown. A lot of the announcements we got were actually just a brief CG trailer that showed us or told us almost next to nothing. You see what I mean? But what are my scores for this year's E3? I did not watch EA's conference. I'm done watching EA's crap. I do not watch EA stuff anymore. You guys are going to say that's ridiculous. This is dumb to do. But EA comes in last place with a negative F. They come in last place with an E. Okay? They get an E. I haven't watched it. I've seen the recap. I don't care. They get an E because they're EA. Who's the second loser? The second loser is Square Enix. Not because their show was within of itself bad. It's just that literally their entire show was recapping. It was literally their entire show was showing things that we have already seen over the weekend or at Microsoft's conference, so on and so forth. They didn't really have anything new to show. I believe they had two new games that they announced, but like I just said, the two new games that they announced were just CG trailers of pretty much nothingness. We didn't see the games at all, no gameplay or whatever. So Square comes in second, not because what they showed was horrendous, it's just because their whole entire conference and presentation were utterly useless. And that's a good example of what I mean by when I'm talking about, did this company have a good E3 or whatever. I'm not talking about the games, I'm talking about the presentations themselves. Square comes in second to last. Third and last, I guess Square and F. Square and F. Ubisoft. I believe I gave them a D minus. I'm not sure. I think I gave them a D minus, but they're definitely third from the bottom. Just really bad pacing. Like I said in my review, way too much emphasis on the smaller titles. Like they spent way too much time on the smaller titles that they were showing. Like they spent a lot of time on Just Dance and Trials and the Mario X Rabbids DLC. They spent like more time in those games than any other game they showed there, and it's like why when those are much smaller, kind of low key filler game projects. You see what I mean? That was just strange to me. But they did have a couple of things that were like interesting or good showings, such as the Assassin's Creed game, Starlink, and I think the pirate game looked fairly interesting. I'm gonna have to see more of that. So those three things kind of prevented Ubisoft's conference from being just a complete and total mess. But just the pacing and their choice of emphasis that they put on certain games was just very odd and strange. And they really got to stop with the performances. They really do. We do not care. In fourth place, I'll probably get a lot of shit for this. Nintendo. Nintendo comes in fourth place with a D plus, and it could have very easily been a B or even higher than that. But more than half of the conference itself went to Smash, when they very well could have shown other things we know are in development. We know have been in development for a long while now. They could have shown other things, but over half of it was Smash. They had the Damon X Machina game. They showed the new Fire Emblem coming out on Switch. That game is going to be great. I'm really looking forward to that. The Xenoblade DLC, which is apparently going to be a standalone title, not DLC, according to what my friend Dom told me. So that looked really good. The story looks interesting. I always thought the backstory of Xenoblade 2 actually was more interesting than Rex's story. Now, the last chapter of Xenoblade 2 was freaking incredible when they tie it all together, but up until that point, I was like, what's happening in the past always just seemed more interesting. So yeah, when they started off with all that, I was like, okay, this is a pretty solid conference. And then Smash hit, and like, oh yes, Smash. And then I was like, wait a minute, 10 minutes have passed. Wait a minute, 15 minutes have passed. Wait a minute, 20. Holy crap, it's 25 minutes and they're still talking about Smash. This is literally it. This is literally all they're showing. So just kind of low quantity, absolutely no surprises whatsoever when it comes to new game reveals or announcements or anything like that. There were surprises within Smash, yeah, but as far as like, hey, look at this game or look at this third party game we're getting, no surprises. No surprises at an E3 conference means poop. A D for Nintendo. Sony gave them a C minus. While just like Nintendo, their quantity of things that they shown were really low. They still had very very extensive gameplay demos. They showed gameplay for I believe pretty much every game they announced. I know a lot of you guys would be like, "What? Sony only showed three new world premieres." Like, well, I mean, yeah, that's still kind of more than Nintendo. I mean, you could count the Mario Party and Machina X Damon, but I'm talking about as far as like the big hitter titles go. It definitely seems like Sony revealed more impactful games. I would say. Of course, not talking about Smash because Smash is of course bigger than all those games combined or whatever in terms of just popularity and notoriety. Um, but yeah, the Control and the Tsushima, those were new gameplay reveals. Control was a completely brand new game, I believe. I believe Tsushima was announced beforehand, um, so it doesn't get full points for that. But they also showed The Last of Us 2. Although technically the game has no gameplay, they showed gameplay of Death Stranding or whatever. I believe I'm missing a couple of things here. But yeah, Sony's and Nintendo's were actually very similar in terms of what was wrong with them. They both had a very low quantity of games that they showed, and the pacing was just very weird or bad. And it was kind of weird because they're kind of also the opposite in that regard as well. Because Nintendo's pacing started off great and then it got really bad. Sony started off really bad and then it got better towards the end, type thing. But I still give the edge to Sony over Nintendo just because I feel like the games that Sony showed were, they were just more, I guess you could say, what's the word I'm looking for? I'm sorry, I just drew a blank and then my dog started scratching herself and making weird noises. It starts with the A. It starts with the A. Sony's games were more ambitious. There we go. There we go. More ambitious games than what Nintendo showed. You know what I mean? With Control, the Resident Evil 2 remake, Last of Us 2, so on and so forth. Just more ambitious games, bigger titles, and of course, I'm not just talking about like open world or anything like that. I'm not talking about literal physical size. I'm just talking about in terms of quality and ambition. Sony showed bigger titles, so I give them a slight edge over Nintendo. Second place, I don't even really care about most of their games, but I guess I'll give it to Bethesda. It really wasn't that bad. It wasn't that incredible either. I give them like a C. And then in first place, lo and behold, it's actually Microsoft with a B minus, and that's kind of bad when a B minus is the winning conference of E3. But hey, it is what it is. Microsoft actually won. Their conference was no nonsense. We didn't have silly performances, silly music we didn't care about. It was back to back to back to back to back rapid fire games, world premiere after world premiere after world premiere. It's really really hard to argue against Microsoft winning this year. They did exactly what we want a company to do as gamers at E3. Only problem is that none of those are exclusives, yeah. But that factor aside, literally that's the only factor you need to set aside. Once you set that aside, it's like the rest of it is pretty much perfect. The pacing was perfect. The quantity of games they showed was perfect. The quality of the games they showed was perfect. The only time it really slowed down was Forza, and like that was it. But for the most part, that conference was perfect. If they just replaced a few of those games as true exclusives, that would have been an A conference for sure. But Microsoft wins. I have to give the win to Microsoft. Now, like I said, again, remember, I'm just talking about the presentations themselves. I'm not talking about, E3 as a whole. Like, did we get great games announced? Of course, we got great games announced. I'm talking about the presentations. Who I felt like made the biggest impact, the biggest splash this year, and I think it was Microsoft, honestly. Um, and before I conclude the video, just want to talk about, kind of my general thoughts on the gaming industry according to what I've seen this E3. Just a couple things I want to kind of discuss and point out. And I know I'll probably get a lot of crap for this, but I I don't I don't like what I'm seeing from these developers in terms of where their focus is. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but a lot of the games this year, or a lot of the games as reveals, were just so incredibly just Hollywood wannabe. A lot of game developers these days are trying way too hard to be Hollywood. They're trying way too hard to be filmmakers, and it's almost like there's like gaming is slowly losing its identity as gaming. I know that might be dramatic to say. It was just based off of this E3 alone. But, when you look at things like Death Stranding and, you have all these reveals of games, they don't show gameplay. Beyond Good or Evil, like, they showed gameplay, but it was kind of like off-screen gameplay. They didn't show direct feed or whatever. Stuff like that. I believe Bethesda had announced 2 brand new games. Was that Bethesda, or am I thinking about Square? Square announced 2 games they didn't show anything of. I believe Bethesda announced 1 or 2 they didn't show anything of. Microsoft announced Halo, just a cinematic. I hate this trend that's going on where it's either the game itself is incredibly cinematic and the gameplay is like secondary or even tertiary. Tertiary. That word is weird to say sometimes. Because sometimes they'll put narrative and story first, and then graphics. And then the gameplay, and then like we barely have a game there, aka Death Stranding, right? I don't like this trend. I don't like this thing a lot of developers are leaning more forward to, and then they had the Captain Spirit bullshit, So then there's that, and then with all these new game reveals, developers and these companies are not, and it's not all of them, of course, and not to be overly dramatic or anything like that, but a lot of these developers are revealing these games or announcing these games with absolutely zero gameplay. And I hate this trend. I hope they slowly get away from it, and hopefully this is not going to be the norm, but it needs to stop. Elder Scrolls 6 is an exciting announcement for millions of people. What would have been really great along with it, though? Some, fucking gameplay. What was that? But yeah, Bethesda they announced that game, that space game or whatever. When he said, "Hey, we have something else to reveal," the screen goes black and then just shows a planet in outer space, and then that's it, right? Like those types of reveals, especially when it's a new IP. Let me specify that when it's a new IP, those types of reveals do absolutely nothing for people. Does absolutely nothing for people. If you are going to reveal a new IP, you need to reveal a new IP with gameplay, or at least a story trailer showing the characters, showing the concept of the game, something like that. But even then, like, I feel like if you're gonna show or reveal a new IP, you should do it along with some gameplay, because we don't know anything about it. We can't be excited for it until we actually see the game itself, because it's a new IP. It's not as bad for, like, example, Elder Scrolls 6. Like, of course, it's the Elder Scrolls. We know what it's going to look like. We know what it's going to play like. So, showing just a hillside, which is literally what they did, and they're just having the logo Elder Scrolls 6. While that was still disappointing, not get gameplay, like, it's still not as bad as if it were a new IP and then that's all they show. You know what I mean? So I just really hope developers get away from this, and I hope developers, like what's going on with Kojima right now, don't get so caught up in the theatrics and cinematics of gaming. Like I said, I completely appreciate a cinematic experience. Games like God of War 3, and stuff like that were like fine. Metal Gear Solid 4 again was one of my favorite games last generation. That game had more cutscene time than gameplay time, but that's still one of my favorite games last gen. I'm down for great narratives. I'm down for great cutscenes. I'm down for great cinematics, just as long as those things don't get in the way of the game itself. You see what I'm saying? God of War is a very cinematic series. Metal Gear is a very cinematic series. But the gameplay has never suffered because of those things. You see what I'm saying? Death Stranding is a perfect example of where if the game is definitely lacking, it's looking like it's lacking in the gameplay department because it has taken a back seat to the cinematics and to the narrative factors. That's just how I feel. But overall, when it comes to the game announcements, the raw number of game announcements, mostly due to Microsoft, who would have thought? It was a good E3 in terms of games. It was a good E3. The presentations themselves, though, I feel like were pretty bad. Like I said, B minus in my opinion, anyways. Of course, was the best conference, which isn't like a bad score. You know, it's an 80 or whatever, but no A's this year at all, and most people were in the C's and D's, arguably two F's, honestly. But those are my thoughts, guys. Thanks for watching. Let me know what you guys thought about this year's E3. What did you think about the conferences? What did you think about the games that were announced? Go ahead and give two separate scores. In terms of the games that were announced, I give this E3 this, but in terms of the presentations, I give them that whatever. Games wise, I feel like this was a pretty good E3. Presentations could use a lot of work from pretty much all the companies except Microsoft, and that's just crazy to me. But that's for this video, guys. Thanks for watching. I'll see y'all later.